Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, when I came here, I didn't think that I would feel so cold, seeing as how much temperatures are up all over the world. But nonetheless, it's a pleasure to be here and a privilege. And I thank the Non-Proliferation Consortium and the International Institute for Strategic Studies for inviting me, and Dr. Fitzpatrick and John Shipman, whom I don't see here, but anyway. I was privileged in 2008 to be a member of the International Commission on Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament that was established by Australia and Japan, and which you know about already. It was established, of course, to look at all of the various aspects of non-proliferation and disarmament. And therefore, the recommendations that it raised to the NPT Review Conference had some results to them which were effective. And one of those results was the decision to have a conference this year in Helsinki on the zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. And my colleagues then and I worked over 1 year's time to tackling the aspects of this issue and consulted experts like yourselves from North and South America, North, South, and East Asia, Europe, Australia, and the Middle East. And we worked with representatives of governments, the global nuclear power industry, and non-governmental organizations devoted to the cause of disarmament, and those responsible for advancing and monitoring nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. The report made the case loud and clear that nuclear weapons are the only weapons ever invented that have the capacity to wholly destroy life on this planet. And the arsenals we now possess are able to do so many times over. The problem with nuclear weapons is at least equal to that of climate change in terms of gravity, and much more immediate in its potential impact, so long as any state that nuclear weapons, others will want them. So long as such weapons remain, it defies credibility that they will not one day be used, and by accident, miscalculation, or design. And any such use would be catastrophic. That was part of the report. This statement by itself delegitimizes nuclear weapons and is a case for their abolition. And the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice in 1996 ruled that the threat or use of nuclear weapons would generally be contrary to the rules of international law applicable in armed conflict, and in particular the principles and rules of humanitarian law. My focus here is not to detail the report, but its findings and recommendations are enduring. To achieve the goal of ridding the world of nuclear weapons and to create an international consensus for the need to progress in this issue. It is relevant to your deliberations at this conference. And in reference to the Middle East, as I said, the report gave strong support to the establishment of a development of zone free of weapons of mass destruction in accordance with the agreement on a resolution in the 1995 NPT Review Conference, calling for practical steps to be taken towards the establishment of such a zone. Like all zones, they generally prohibit the testing, stationing, developing, and use of nuclear weapons within a designated territory, and include protocols by which nuclear weapon states can renounce the use of and threat of use of nuclear weapons against states included in the zone. The Commission strongly encouraged all NPT nuclear weapon state members to sign and ratify the protocols of all the zones, and similarly all the other nuclear armed states, so long as they remain outside the NPT, to issue standalone negative security assurances for each of them. And the Commission stated that the zones have made and continue to make a very important contribution to the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament, and not the least of their roles is helping to build and consolidate the normative constraints against nuclear weapons. As you all know, ladies and gentlemen, Arab states, including my country, have embraced such a zone, and establishing it is the official nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament policy of all Arab states. I have not seen any public commitment by Israel in support of the zone. Iran, while paying lip service to the zone, is more committed to pursuing enrichment of uranium and other suspicious activities that raise doubts about their commitment to the zone, while which will compel other countries in the area to pursue policies that could lead to untold and possibly dramatic consequences. Indeed, the best way toward peace in our region is for all nations, but most importantly, Iran and Israel, to support the establishment of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction. Ironically, this is actually a concept that the Iranian government itself had approved of before. And quite apart from the early 1970s and 1980s, Iran joined with Egypt and other nations to work through the United Nations to attempt to gain support for what was then called a nuclear weapons-free zone. This led then Egyptian President Mubarak to propose a resolution calling all states in the Middle East to take practical steps towards the establishment of an effectively verifiable Middle East zone free of weapons of mass destruction, nuclear, chemical, and biological, and their delivery systems. And yet, despite all these efforts, our region can hardly be called free of weapons of mass destruction. Indeed, the Middle East is the most militarized region in the world today, largely due to the many conflicts that have raged and still rage in the area. While soldiers, tanks, and planes have been growing in numbers in the area, the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988 and the Second Gulf War of 1991 increased the danger of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in the region, as well as ballistic missiles capable of carrying them. States seeking WMDs for various reasons, including deterrence, arms races with neighbors, the ability to attack or project the ability to attack, or to spare the high cost of conventional weapons. The first nation in the region to acquire nuclear capability was Israel. One can follow this tragic arc right up to last year, when the International Atomic Energy Agency announced that it had found incontrovertible evidence of Iran working to develop nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia firmly believes that it is in every nation's interest, including Israel's and Iran's, that they do not possess nuclear weapons. This is why, through various initiatives, we're sending messages to Iran that it is their right, as it is any nation's right, and as we ourselves are doing, to develop a civilian program for nuclear energy. But that trying to parlay that program into nuclear weapons is a dead end, and that wiser choices will result in wider riches. A zone free of weapons of mass destruction is the best means to get Iran and Israel to give up nuclear weapons. Such a zone must be accompanied by a rewards regime that provides economic and technical support for countries that join, plus a nuclear security umbrella guaranteed by the permanent members of the Security Council. It should include a sanctions regime that puts economic and political sanctions on countries that don't join, plus military sanctions against those countries that try to develop weapons of mass destruction, also guaranteed by the permanent members of the Security Council. Barring the current Iranian regime's support for a zone free of weapons of mass destruction, the IAEA report on Iranian nuclear capabilities is disturbing. But I agree with those in the international community who possess the blessed wisdom to know that military strikes would be entirely counterproductive. Indeed, it is important to remember that there are other non-military policy alternatives as yet unexplored that could have the desired result without the unwanted consequences. The same thing can be said about Israeli nuclear weapons, despite the Israeli denial policy and its excuses of not having the regional peace that responds to its own interests and ambitions in the Arab-Israeli conflict. As we have recently seen, Israel's unwillingness to cease its unlawful colonization and continued refusal to grant the Palestinians their own homeland is the core reason that this conflict continues. There is no lack of proposals for peace, many of them completely rational and fair. Indeed, the only viable one today remains the Arab Peace Initiative, originally outlined by King Abdullah in 2002. It calls on Israel to withdraw to its 1967 borders and the establishment of a viable and contiguous Palestine with its capital in East Jerusalem and bordering Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. The issue of refugees will be settled through mutual agreement, and we urge Israel to take the necessary steps towards peace and justice. With peace, Israel will no longer have the excuse to own and deploy all weapons of mass destruction, including their nuclear arsenal. Our region is beset by a number of great challenges, but in the end, these challenges can be met by the very principles that recognize the reality of Israel's nuclear weapons and guided the International Atomic Energy Agency to investigate and then announce the truth behind Iran's nuclear program. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the principle of openness. For if you will allow me a slight stretch of my poetic faculties, I would say that openness is indeed at the heart of many of the issues facing the region. Is it not openness that Iran fears, lest its true nuclear ambitions be discovered? And is it not openness that Israel fears, lest its true possession of nuclear weapons be known? Let us therefore embrace openness and join together for the good of all, especially in the establishment of a zone free of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. The time is now, the threat is clear. We have everything to gain and nothing to lose. Let us drop our differences and find mutual benefit in waging peace for ourselves, for our nations, and for our children. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.